Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asto Tarasata Sri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhupada pranams, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Thank you for joining. We are continuing our study of the first canto, 18th chapter. Today's verse is number 11. Rishaya Uchuhu Sutta Jiva Samasaumya Shashvatir Vishadam Yashaha Yastvam Sham Sasi Krishnasya Martyanam Amritam Hina. Rishaya Uchuhu Sutta Jiva Sama Saumya Shashvatir Vishadam Yashaha Yastvam Sham Sasi Krishnasya Martyanam Amritam Hinaha. Rishaya Uchuhu Sutta Jiva Sama Saumya Shashvatir Vishadam Yashaha Yastvam Sham Sasi Krishnasya Martyanam Amritam Hina. Please check.
Drishaya Uchu Sutta Jiva Sama Saumya Shastratir Vishadam Yasha Yastvam Sasi Krishnasya Martyanam Amritam Hina. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Rishaya Ucha Sutta Jiva Shama Shamaya Shashvatir Vishadam Yasha Yastam Shamshashi Krishnasya Martinam Amritam Hina.
Hare Krishna. Ishaya Uchohu Shuta Jiva Shama Shaumya Shashvatir Vishadam Ishaha Yastvam Shashat Krishnasya Martyanam Amritam Hinaha. Hare Krishna.
Vishaya Uchu सूतजीव समासौम्य शाश्वतिर्विशदं यशा यस्त्वं संशसि कृष्णस्य मर्त्यानाम् अमृतं हिना.
Hare Krishna. Rishayuchu Sutajiva Samaha Samya Shashti Vishadam Yashaha Yastavam Shasasi Krishnasya Nartiyanam Vita Hinaha. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Okay. Rishaya Uchuhu. The good sages said, Sutta, O Sutta Goswami, Jiva, we wish your life for Samaha, many years, Saumya, grave, Shashvatihi, eternal, Vishadam, particularly, Yashaha, in fame, Yahatvam, because you, Sham Sasi, speaking nicely, Krishnasya, of Lord Sri Krishna, Martyanam, of those who die, Amritam, eternity of life, He, certainly, Naha, our. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The good sages said, O grave Sutta Goswami, may you live many years and have eternal fame, for you are speaking very nicely about the activities of Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. This is just like nectar for mortal beings like us. Purport. When we hear about the transcendental qualities and activities of the personality of Godhead, we may always remember what has been spoken by the Lord himself in the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, 9th verse. I'll pause here for a moment. Does anyone want to quote Bhagavad Gita 4:9? Any volunteers?
Janma karma cha me divyam.
Go ahead. Evam yo veti tattva tyaktadeha, or
Punarjanma
naiti
naiti
mameti.
mameti swarjuna.
So Srila Prabhupada is actually going to give us an elongated version of the translation of this for the next few sentences. This is actually the verse that he's going to speak here, but he really unpacks it. So you actually might not even recognize it as that verse, but it in fact is. So continuing Srila Prabhupada's purport, his acts, even when he acts in human society, are all transcendental, for they are all accentuated by the spiritual energy of the Lord, which is distinguished from his material energy. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, such acts are called divyam. This means that he does not act or take his birth like an ordinary living being under the custody of material nature, nor is his body material or changeable like that of ordinary living beings. And one who understands this fact, either from the Lord or from authorized sources, is not reborn after leaving the present material body. Such an enlightened soul is admitted into the spiritual realm of the Lord and engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So that whole thing from where it was quoted till now, that was actually just Bhagavad Gita 4:9, but in an expanded way with sort of like a commentary. So continuing. Therefore, the more we hear about the transcendental activities of the Lord, as they are stated in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the more we can know about his transcendental nature and thus make definite progress on the path back to Godhead. The verse again, the good sages said, O grave Sutta Goswami, may you live many years and have eternal fame, for you are speaking very nicely about the activities of Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. This is just like nectar for mortal beings like us. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namne Namaste Saraswate Deva Gauravani Pacharni Nirvishesha Shunya Bhadi Paschatu Deshatarni. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnana Jnana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatita Nam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, the theme of today's verse, of course, is the benefit of hearing and chanting, right? So, Sutta Goswami is being glorified because he's always speaking pastimes of Krishna. And so, the sages who are listening are appreciating that fact. Because they're also receiving some benefit from it. They're able to hear what he's speaking, and he's only speaking these transcendental subject matters. So while describing the benefits of hearing from an authorized chanter, we see that a blessing is being given, right, in today's verse. And most of the time, when we think about a blessing, right, when someone's being offered a blessing, it's generally mainly all about the person who's getting the blessing, right? Someone did something that we appreciate, so we wish them good fortune. It usually goes something like this. May all your dreams come true. May you never have to struggle for anything that you need. May you always be happy in all your endeavors, etc., like that. So it's mostly about the person because we see that they did something right or appreciable, and we also want to let them know, any struggle like that. Generally, that's how blessings go. But this blessing in today's verse is actually given for the benefit of everyone, right? And this, of course, will be the main theme of today's discussion, how hearing and chanting benefits everyone more than we can possibly fathom. But before we really delve into that, I want to take the opportunity to relate a story that Srila Prabhupada shared several times throughout his books. And it involves blessings, just like today's verse is. And the theme is also very similar. So actually, I'll just read one of these occurrences of Srila Prabhupada sharing this story. This one is coming from the 4th canto, 27th chapter, verse 12, purport. It's in the story of King Puranjana. And so in his purport, Srila Prabhupada tells this story. And it will probably sound familiar to most of you. So once, when a saintly person was passing on his way, he met a prince, the son of a king. And he blessed him, saying, "Dear prince, may you live forever." The sage next met a saintly person and said to him, "You may either live or die." That was his blessing to the sage. Eventually, the sage met a brahmachari devotee, and he blessed him, saying, "My dear devotee, you may die immediately." Right? That's his blessing to the brahmachari. Finally, the sage met a hunter, and he blessed him, saying, "Neither live nor die." Right? So just to give a quick summary of the four, the prince, he said you should live forever. That's his blessing. To the sage or the saintly person, and he said you can either live or die, and these are all blessings. To the brahmachari devotee, he said you should you die immediately, and to the hunter, neither live nor die. Now Srila Prabhupada will explain what the sages what his logic was behind these particular blessings. So continuing, the point is that those who are very sensual and are engaged in sense gratification do not wish to die. Generally, a prince has enough money to enjoy his senses, Therefore, the great sage said that he should live forever. For as long as he lived, he could enjoy life, but after his death, he would go to hell. Since the brahmachari devotee was leading a life of severe austerities and penances in order to be promoted back to Godhead, the sage said that he should die immediately so that he need not continue to labor hard and could instead go back home, back to Godhead. A saintly person may either live or die, for during his life he is engaged in serving the Lord, and after his death he also serves the Lord. Thus, this life and the next are the same for the saintly devotee, for in both he serves the Lord. Since the hunter lives a very ghastly life due to killing animals, and since he will go to hell when he dies, he is advised neither to live nor die. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Mother Sobaradhe. So now in today's verse, the blessing that we read, it doesn't quite fit the pattern of the 4 blessings that are given in the story that we just read. Sutta Goswami is not a prince, right? He's a saintly person. So if we're following the blessings that are given in the story, he could either live or die, right? That's how the saintly person was blessed. Because either way for him, for Sutta Goswami, it would be beneficial whether he's lives a long time or whether he dies immediately. It doesn't matter because he's always engaged in serving the Lord, right? But the blessing that's given in today's verse takes into account not just what is most beneficial for Sutta Goswami, but what is most beneficial for the whole world, right? Sure, he could die immediately, or he could never die and receive the same exact benefit. So for Sutta Goswami, it'd be the same. But if he did die now, then those who would have had the opportunity to hear from him would be missing out on that benefit. So although the blessing is technically beneficial for Sutta Goswami, right? Because it doesn't matter for him, because he's a saintly person. He's engaged in Krishna service no matter what, so he's satisfied. So since technically it's beneficial for Sutta Goswami, it's actually more beneficial to his current audience, right? So there's a little bit of a difference in the way that this blessing was given. So what we are to learn from this transaction is that when we find ourselves fortunate enough to be in the presence of saintly persons, we shouldn't take it lightly. And we should use every moment to receive the benefit of their instructions. Because we don't know how long we will have access to that good fortune, right? If we are not eagerly receiving the beneficial instructions from the saintly personalities, Krishna will just send them somewhere else where people will actually benefit from their instructions. So for the saintly person, it doesn't matter. They could be here, they could be there, they could be anywhere. A pure devotee actually prays, Krishna, I don't mind even if you send me to the hellish planets, as long as I remember you and I can constantly talk about your pastimes, right? So this is how a pure devotee prays. So today's verse, of course, these blessings are about Srila Sutta Goswami. So I also wanted to examine a quote from Sutta Goswami. This comes from also from the first canto, the first chapter, verse 19. It's a very famous quotable verse. Mother Sobrata, if you want to bring that up as well, you could. But at 1:19, it goes like this: Vayam tuna vitriptyama uttama shloka vikrame yach-trinvatam rasajnanam svadu svadu pade pade. Right, most people at least remember the last part of that verse. It's quoted quite often. So the translation goes like this. This is Sutta Goswami speaking. We never tire of hearing the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead, who is glorified by hymns and prayers. Those who have developed a taste for transcendental relationships with him relish hearing of his pastimes at every moment. Right? So this verse by Srila Sutta Goswami has a very similar theme to the verse which we are talking about today, which is about Srila Sutta Goswami. And we see that since he, in this verse 119, the one up on your screen here, since he is appreciating the process of hearing about the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead, and since he actually has that understanding, and he understands that every single moment should be used in relishing these pastimes, since he has that qualification, then that actually qualifies him to be a speaker who can speak on and on and on and on, who should just have a very long life and continue doing what he's doing, because he understands that value, and then he's acting accordingly. So I'm going to read a little bit of this purport as well, or maybe it's actually the whole thing. Okay, so purport from 119. Srila Prabhupada writes, "There is a great difference between mundane stories, fiction or history, and the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. The histories of the whole universe contain references to the pastimes of the incarnations of the Lord. The Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas are histories of bygone ages recorded in connection with the pastimes of the incarnations of the Lord, and therefore remain fresh even after repeated readings. For example, anyone may read Bhagavad Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam repeatedly throughout his whole life, and yet find them in new light of information. Mundane news is static, whereas transcendental news is dynamic, inasmuch as the spirit is dynamic and matter is static. Those who have developed a taste for understanding the transcendental subject matter are never tired of hearing such narrations. One is quickly satiated by mundane activities, but no one is satiated by transcendental or devotional activities." I'll just interject one thing here, because the word satiated, we generally understand it as meaning satisfied. It's a synonym. But the word satiated actually means that you've had enough. Because otherwise, if we just use it as satisfied and we use the definition that we generally use as satisfied, even the word satisfy actually comes from complete, but we use it in a very different way. So it may seem strange if we're using it the way that we understand what satisfy means, because one isn't actually satisfied by mundane activities ever, right? But the nature of mundane activities or material activities, just like earlier it's talking about the difference between spirit is dynamic and matter is static. So matter being static, it goes through these 6 changes. It comes into being, it remains for some time, it grows, it produces some byproduct, it dwindles, and it dies, right? So these are the 6 transformations that it'll go through. So in that sense, at the peak of this, of these 6 transformations, there is this sense of completeness, right? The satiation. But it says no one is satiated by transcendental or devotional activities, because you can't ever reach completeness, because it's always getting more and more and more and more. It's continually growing. So that's what this means by one is quickly satiated by mundane activities, but no one is satiated by transcendental or devotional activities. That's just an explanation of that. So then continuing the purport. Uttama Shloka indicates that literature which is not meant for nescience. Mundane literature is in the mode of darkness or ignorance, whereas transcendental literature is quite different. Transcendental literature is above the mode of darkness, and its light becomes more luminous with progressive reading and realization of the transcendental subject matter. Thank you for bringing that up as well, Mataji. So a little story in this regard, and I'm sure we've all had this experience when reading Shastra. So my first occurrence of this experience was fairly early on. when I was still a very young aspiring devotee. Now I'm a very old aspiring devotee. But fairly early on, I lived in a temple for about a year and a half, and in the Philadelphia temple, Jai Shri Shri Radha Shara Bihari. And I had this desire to study Shastra. This is what I wanted to do. That's why I moved into the temple. But at the time, most of the study programs we started at the Philadelphia temple never ended up going anywhere. In other words, we would pick a book and we'd say, okay, we're going to study this book, and we'd pick the day that would actually suit everyone that's, coming together. Okay, yeah, it's going to be this day every week, and we'll spend this much time. And so several times it happened where we started this, and the first session would go very well, and oftentimes there would also be a second session, but generally there wasn't a third, because somehow something would happen. Oh, this particular devotee can't make it, so we'll wait until the next week. And then there never was a next week. And then by the time we got encouraged to start a study program again, we would just pick another book, pick a new book, and then we'd do it again. And so we'd be very enthusiastic, and we'd have like 2 sessions. Sometimes it was only 1 session. Honestly, I don't want to exaggerate. And sometimes we actually made it to 3, but generally we didn't get past that, unfortunately. And so I had this need to study Shastra that it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening there. So this opportunity came up where one young devotee who was coming to the temple frequently, I actually recently just met with him after not seeing him for many, many years. But anyway, young fellow, he was coming to the temple, and he wanted to go to Vrindavan to study Shastra. He wanted to take Bhakti Shastri, but he didn't want to go alone, right? And he was just about to turn 18, and he was inheriting some money because I guess one of his parents, I think, passed away when he was young. So on his 18th birthday, he inherited, a decent amount of money. And so he asked me, he said, "Hey, would you go to India with me? I'll pay for your ticket. But I just don't want to go alone, and I want to take Bhakti Shastri." And I said, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, that would be my pleasure. I'll definitely go to Vrindavan with you and study Bhakti Shastri." So I was in bliss. I was super excited because finally I was going to be able to study Shastra. And so, as it turned out, something happened with this fellow. Anyway, somehow he couldn't end up going to India, and I was already attached. I needed to go to study Bhakti Shastri. So I figured out a way to scrape up it was only at that time, the plane ticket was only $600 round trip. And then I needed another, I think, $100 and some for the course. So somehow I was able to beg my family members to give, to collectively come up with $800 to send me to India for 6 months. So while there, studying Bhagavad Gita, and I sort of overcompensated because I didn't know when I was going to get this opportunity again to study. So while going through the course, which is already, you're already reading so much Shastra during the course, because you have to read before the classes, and then you take the classes, and then you're writing essays, and you're studying and all this. So it's a lot already. But I took it upon myself because, again, I didn't know when I was going to have the opportunity again, that along with whatever's normal studying of the Shastra that is required for the course, I was also reading 1 chapter of Gita per day. And then so I'd go through, so that I'd go during that time. So for 6 months, I was reading, the normal time, but then I was also reading a chapter per day. So I ended up going through the Bhagavad Gita so many times during that particular period. And I had this experience of this phenomenon that Srila Prabhupada expressed in this purport, that you could read it so many times and it's ever fresh. You actually, the light of it becomes more luminous. Every time you read the Shastra, you see things that you'd never noticed before, you didn't pick up on before. There's a deeper meaning behind the same words that you've read over and over and over again. So that was the first time that I had experience of this early on, just reading Bhagavad Gita over and over and over again, seeing how no matter how many times you read it, there's just you don't, you always want to, you want to find out more, and you always will find out more every time you read it. Right. So then, unfortunately, there was a very long period of time, 10.5 years, where I didn't take the opportunity to continuously study Shastra like that. I got it in my head that in order for me to perform my service in Krishna consciousness, I had to get a specific kind of job so that I could have, anyway, it was this whole thing. I thought that I had to fulfill my material necessities before I could, properly fulfill my spiritual goals. And there was a reason behind that, but that's not important. So then it wasn't until, again, 10.5 years later, when I was able to study Shastra again. And then again, this experience is there. It came because I went through Srimad Bhagavatam, with a course, studying with the Bhakti Vaibhav and the Bhaktivedanta courses. And then it became my service to help develop study guides for these particular courses. And so I got to go through Srimad Bhagavatam multiple times. And with doing that, again, it's the same thing with Bhagavad Gita. The more times you go through it, the more luminous it becomes, right? And so that's the experience there. And the same thing with Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. I had the great fortune of studying that multiple times as well. And so each time more comes out. And then when you go, after doing that, you go and you read Gita again, then there are so many things within Gita that we never noticed, because it's actually Srila Prabhupada's paraphrasing things that are in Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And we've never noticed it before because we weren't so familiar with those particulars. So it's all this phenomenon that Srila Prabhupada talks about. It's actually something that I'm sure all of us have experienced at some point to some level, but it's absolutely there, where we can constantly read Shastra and never be satiated in this regard, never feel that it's complete. We would always be wanting more, right? And that's because Shastra is ever fresh, right? It's not different from Krishna. Krishna is always expanding. So our appreciation of Shastra can never have a limit. We can always appreciate it more and more. So Shastra being ever fresh and coming from the Supreme Lord himself, with the purpose of elevating the reader's or the hearer's consciousness to reawaken our eternal loving relationship with the Lord, is of the utmost value. It's the most valuable thing that we have in our possession, right? So I want to talk a little bit about value, just value, the concept of value, right? So there are many things in life that we value, right? Things that we spend our time on, our thoughts on, our energy, our money, etc. Things that we interact with these things because we have assigned a value to them. Just things that we automatically do, right? Wherever we find ourselves spending time, thoughts, energy, money, etc. It means that we value these things. These things are important to us, right? Unfortunately, there are things in life that we value that we don't necessarily want to value, right? We see that we spend our time doing things that if we were to write an ideal list of things that we would like to spend our time doing, and a list of things that we wouldn't even have to make a list of things we don't want to do. If we have a proper list of things that we want to do constantly, then that's enough, because then it means anything that's not on that list is not so important. So sometimes I give this exercise for people to do. It's a quite eye-opening experience if one can actually do this. Is if you make a list of things that you value, right? And so the list will always be a very positive, nice list, because they're, especially for aspiring devotees, it'll involve a lot of devotional service, hearing, chanting, reading, associated with devotees, etc. These are the things that we value, at least theoretically, we value them, right? So, but if we make another list of how we spend our day, how we spend our time, our thoughts, what we think about most of the day, what we spend our energy on, what we spend our money on, and we compare those two lists, what we actually spend our time, energy, and money on, and what we would like to spend our time, energy, money, thoughts, etc. on. It would, first of all, it would blow our minds, because we would be thinking, I don't even like some of these things that are on my list that I do, for sometimes several hours a day, right? I don't even want to spend my time doing those things, right? We see this. Sometimes it's a job, sometimes it's just a subject matter that we talk about. Sometimes something annoys us so much that we feel the need to talk about it a lot in order to, counteract it or something. We see this with politics, for example, where people become very passionate about something that they say that they hate, right? And so it's an aversion, which is the flip side of attachment. It means you're attached to the concept. But the problem is, we have this expression too, when you see someone's so absorbed in a particular subject matter that they hate. You hear this expression that someone says that thing is living rent-free in your brain. It's something that you shouldn't spend so much time on, right? And so we see this when we make these lists, the list of things that we think we value, at least theoretically, the way we would like to spend our lives, and then we compare it to how we actually spend our lives, right? And so generally, this is a wake-up call. If we do this exercise and we see, oh, wow, I actually spend a whole lot of time on things that actually I don't want to value, but clearly I do, because I do them without even thinking about it. So therefore, I must value them. Otherwise, why am I spending so much time and energy and thought on these things, right? So when we compare these things and we can see, okay, this is not how I want to be spending my life. And then we can start making a change, a conscious change, because we know how we do want to spend our time, and we know how we can actually facilitate that. So if we want to spend our time serving Krishna, and hearing from him, chanting his names, engaging in his loving service, then we have everything we need to do that. We just actually have to pull the trigger on it. We have to get started. We have to do it, right? So we have to take advantage, for example, of those who are already doing what we wish that we, were doing, what we wish we could do. So Sutta Goswami, Srila Sutta Goswami, as we read from before, he understands the value of the Lord's pastimes, hearing them, repeating them, etc. And since he understands that value, that's how he lives. So if we want to live a certain way, we find someone who's already living that way, and we learn from them. How do we do this? We take their association, right? We have to take full advantage of this type of thing, because when we hear the Shastra, not only is it ever fresh, but it's, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out, it's illuminating, right? So it helps us understand what is actually reality. What is our actual position in life? What is our sambandha? What is the relationship between us and the Supreme Lord? And when we get that understanding, then we then automatically understand how we are to act accordingly, according to what our true position actually is. So we get that sambandha, then we act accordingly in the abhideya, and if we do that, then we meet the prayojana, the ultimate goal, re-engaging in Krishna's intimate service, right? And so this is something that we need to put a lot of time, effort, thought into redirecting our consciousness from whatever we're currently valuing, whether, like I said, whether we like to or not. We don't want to value these other things, in theory at least, but we're spending our time doing these things. So we have to figure out how to redirect our consciousness from meditating on these things which are not getting us anywhere, the things that are, what word did Srila Prabhupada use? Static, right? Materialistic things, they're static. They don't get us anywhere. So we need to stop meditating on the static things and start meditating on the dynamic things, the spiritual things, right? And when we do that, we redirect our consciousness from material to spiritual. So just as things that are material go through these 6 changes, and spirit is eternal, ideas, if it's a material idea, if it's centered around ourself instead of centered around Krishna, it will also go through these 6 transformations. It'll come into being, it'll remain for some time, it'll grow a little bit, it'll produce some byproduct, it'll dwindle, and it'll die, right? So any concept, any activity, any profit we're trying to make, if it's based on material, it'll exist for some time, it'll come to a peak, and then it'll disappear. That's the nature of anything material, right? But the nature of spiritual is that it continues forever, and it's increasing constantly, right? So when we spend our time on things, especially like Shastra, then we're actually understanding how we are to actually work, how we are to behave, what we are to put our time, our thoughts, our energy, etc., how we are to spend these things. And so it's beneficial for us to find someone who is living that way. So that's what today's verse is all about. So let's see. That went a lot quicker than I thought it was going to go. But generally, the discussions after are better than the talk itself, as far as my assessment is. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has anything to say on this matter, realizations or questions.
If anybody has questions, please just go ahead, Mother Muktidatri.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
I love to hear your life story, Prabhu. It was so nice. Like how you say, like you went to India and did Bhakti Shastri. It was so nice, Prabhu. I really like it so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you.
The idea that even any ideas or projects that we have that are material also go through the 6 stages. I never thought of it like that. Every time I've heard the 6 stages that a body, I've always applied that only to our bodies. But it's, and it makes so much sense that any plan that we have or any project that we have, all of them also are going to go through those 6 changes. And it's only spiritual activities, spiritual plans, spiritual projects that will be eternal, because if whatever we do, that is where we will start in our next life, if we should take birth again and have to go through this. So that was a realization today. We apply that to everything material. And then I think when you think about it like that, you realize how all of these are also so useless. Like I say it, I mean, like you were saying in theory, I've been saying it, but when you actually close your eyes and think about what you have said and the understanding that's coming, it's like, yes, everything, our relationships, everything is going to end here. Only our spiritual actions are going to be carried forward. It's pretty profound.
Yeah, it's so Bhagavad Gita actually teaches this. So first it's talking about Sankhya, which is the difference between spirit and matter, but then it talks about the difference between spiritual activities and material activities, right? So when we're talking about the karma yoga, action, and Krishna consciousness, that those activities are actually going through those same transformations if they're material, but there's no loss or diminution in spiritual activities. So yeah, Bhagavad Gita explains this. It's a subtle thing, so it's not something that we pick up on immediately. But as Srila Prabhupada pointed out in the other purport that we read today, is that the more we read it, the more illuminating it is, right? So then these things start to become clear and even obvious, and then we can start seeing that, wow, these activities that I've put so much time and effort in, actually, they're not helping me one bit. They made me temporarily comfortable in the temporary body, but I put so much effort in. And if I would have put that same effort in bhakti, doing service for Krishna instead of doing service for myself, then there would never be any loss. Everything picks up, as you said, in the next life. If you aren't able to finish in this life, then at least you start off right where you left off. So yeah, any idea, activity, anything, if it's material, it goes through those changes. If it's spiritual, it follows the nature of spirit.
Yeah, it's just that for me personally, it's an painfully slow process, and I'm not envious of what you have done. You wanted to study it so badly that you would, and you took on that desire and you made it happen. I never did. I still don't. I'm not sure I will be able to going forward. I'm grateful that at least at slow speed, I'm heading in the right direction, but it is. But I like you were saying in Bhagavad Gita, I have been reading, there is no diminution. It will, but only today when you explained it like this, I think I have realized it and understood it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's and again, you were saying that you read it so many times, and each time you got a better understanding. There was more light to it, and I think that is what is happening. I'm just saying that for me, it is happening at a very slow speed, which again is the way it is meant to be. So that's how it's going to happen. And
yeah, it's a slow speed for me too. That when I took Bhakti Shastri was 30 years ago. So, or actually I was 28, but yeah, when I met the devotees was 30 years ago. So it's a slow process, depending on what we do. But the importance is, so it's not that you have to necessarily go somewhere and do a course. It's just that, even these classes right here, we just have to read Shastra. Even if let's see, Vaisheshika Prabhu, he has this, I think he made a table, like a chart, and it shows how many pages that you can read of each of the books, and then how, and then you can get through, in a certain amount of time. And so you can stick with something like that, or, there's so many different ways. Or like we were pointing out today, is if you find someone who lives the Shastra, right? There are different grades. There are people who appreciate the Shastra, right? And so you listen to them sometimes.
Mm.
But when you find someone who's actually living the Shastra always, then that's the type of person that you want to surround yourself with and take full advantage of.
Yeah.
Right? We see, like, for example, we recently lost from our material perspective, Kadamba Kanana Swami,
Mm.
who he gave a wonderful example of how one can live and how one can leave one's body in Krishna consciousness. And so those of us who've had the great fortune of actually getting some of his association while he was here, you know, that's something that, you know, it's not something that can be taken lightly. And a lot of times we don't even understand that until it's gone, right? We all of a sudden it's gone, and then we think, oh man, I should have taken more advantage of that, you know. Or like Ayendra Prabhu, I know a lot of devotees were feeling his separation very hard because he has such a taste for Nam Kirtan, and so when someone has that and they can give it to you, we should take advantage, because it's quite fortunate. And so if we're able to take full advantage of that, then that'll be to our benefit, right? But if we're not, then, as I mentioned, Krishna can just send them elsewhere to do that service where it's going to be more appreciated. So yeah, we have to understand when we find such a rare soul, we have to be able to take full advantage of their presence, like the sages of Naimisharana were doing with Sutta Goswami. They understood, okay, this is someone who relishes speaking Krishna's pastimes, and that's what we need. We need to hear Krishna's pastimes. So you just live forever. You just live forever, and you keep doing what you're doing, and we're gonna sit here, right? That's what the theme of today's verse is. So that's what we should be able to follow. So we should first get an attraction to Shastra, and read it as often as we can. Surround ourselves with other people who are enthusiastic about reading Shastra. But when we find someone who lives the Shastra, we should take extra advantage of that. If that makes sense. Kalpesh Prabhu, you have your hand. Or is that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Kalpesh Prabhu, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear all the time what you are going to say. So thank you for your class, and please accept my humble obeisances. I was very much impressed hearing your story, how eager and enthusiastic you were for taking that course. And then immediately what came in my mind is about my own laziness, that I have so many opportunities, so many resources around me, and still I'm not able to motivate myself or stay on that platform. So that is something I really like, that life real story what you brought up, and which was really inspiring for today, to think about it and meditate on it. Like, how can we improve our enthusiasm and motivation when we have plenty of resources around us? There's nothing less available. We have so much available here. So that was my learning. But I would like to ask a question. There are a couple of them, but first I would ask is, at certain point, I realized that due to my own nature, I was in the conflict uh, in all of my daily affairs of life, and realizing that it is due to my not able to accept this situation and not able to adjust to that situation, which is provided to me in that given time. So how would we see from Shastra's point of view, or from your experience?
Okay, that's a great question. It's a very important one. So there was something that I wanted to say about the first thing you said, and then it turns out it's the same thing that I'm going to say about the second thing you said. So we actually can't rely on our own efforts to actually understand or take advantage of the Shastra. If we are relying on our own effort, in other words, say in my past, I was a very good student, right? And so I know how to take notes, I know how to memorize things, I know how to logically explain things, right? And so say I use that previous conditioning to study Shastra, memorize the shlokas, learn how to logically present them, etc. If I'm doing that with my own ability, it's actually not changing my consciousness. I'm just becoming an expert at another thing, right? It just happens to be something that is transcendental. But if my consciousness isn't actually that I'm doing this for Krishna, or that Krishna is actually doing this through me, I'm actually just a very insignificant part of what's going on, that Krishna is the ability, that every single ability that I have is coming from Krishna. Every opportunity that's ever been brought before me, that's all because of Krishna. The fact that I'm able to take advantage of that is because of Krishna. The fact that I also have the option to ignore that opportunity is also coming from all of that. Everything is coming from Krishna. So if we don't have that consciousness, then everything we're doing, we think that we're actually, if we think we're doing it, and we're relying on our own tools, our conditioned tools that we've accumulated throughout our life, then we're not going to get full benefit. We'll get some benefit because we are dealing with transcendental subject matter, but it won't be full benefit, right? So the other side of the story that I told, because like I said, I waited 10.5 years before I was able to study again Srimad Bhagavatam that time, was that I had the wrong idea that now that I had cultivated this spiritual understanding from Bhagavad Gita, Shriya Sopanishad, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, in the Bhakti Shastri course, that, okay, now I'm going to do a preaching center. I'm going to go and preach. But in order to preach, first I have to, in order to have this preaching center, first I have to I got to save up some money so that I can actually establish a center where I can go. And I have to have a certain kind of job because, if I'm working too much, then how am I going to preach? So I wanted to get a certain job where I only had to work during the week. I had the weekends off and I would have nights off. And that's when you could do the preaching program. I would have had the summer off. I was going to be a teacher. And then so you can do, extra long seminars during the summertime. And materially speaking, it was a fairly good plan. It was a solid strategy, because you need facilities for everything, right? So, well, if you need facilities, you got to go and work for them. But that was wrong. I was relying on myself. I thought, I was thinking that I had to do all of these things in order for it to work out. But that was wrong. So for 10.5 years, I was thinking I was engaging in Krishna service, and I was to an extent, but not really. I was fanning my own ego, thinking that I'm doing this in the service of Krishna, but I am doing this, right? So it was a misunderstanding. And it wasn't until I was able to study Srimad Bhagavatam that I actually realized that that was a foolish notion to think that I have to do this, I have to do that. Everything is coming from Krishna. I don't have to go through this, that, and the other thing and make things materially logistic to have a preaching center or to preach. Krishna is in charge of all that. So if he's going to give it, he's going to give it. Whether, I go through whatever hoops I've imagined that I have to go through or not, right? So it took a long time to get there. And the only thing that had to change was my consciousness from I'm doing this to no, this is for Krishna. I'm just a tiny instrument in his service, right? So that's the only thing it ever takes. It takes us understanding the proper sambandha, who we are in relation to Krishna. We are an infinitesimal part and parcel of him. So we have the potency that's coming from him. But we are quite tiny. So we're not the center. We are. Our activity should run parallel with his. He's the center, and we act as such, as he's the center, not as if we're the center. And so that's what we need to do. We can't rely on our own. So we have to actually rely on Krishna. We have to put that faith not in ourselves, but in Krishna. We have to use our logic to explain the Shastra, our experience to explain the Shastra. These things, aside from Shastra, our logic, our reasoning, our any resources we have, if they're not connected to Krishna, then, like we were talking about earlier, that means they're material. That means they will go through the 6 transformations, right? But as soon as we actually connect them to Krishna, and we're actually using them properly, then we actually get full benefit, and we see that things just automatically happen. So it's just the consciousness that we have to do, that we have to change in order for things to go nicely. So when we see that something's going a certain way and we wish it were going another way, it generally means that we think that we're in control, right? Because if we understand that we're not in control, that Krishna is in control, then we'll still do the activity to try to make it perfect. But we know that the result is up to Krishna. It's not up to us. So if it goes in a way that we didn't expect, well, that was Krishna's call. So if we can do our activities in a detached way, still doing our best to make it as good as possible, and even learning from, certain experiences, but it should always be based on Shastra, and it should always be completely focused around Krishna, not around us. Does that make some sense?
Yes, I think so. You made an excellent point, and I think so. Slowly, I'm not like experienced like you so much. I'm still below neophyte level, and I think so. In nutshell, you're trying to say we have to see the will of Supreme Lord in everything, and whatever happens, it's due to Krishna's will at any given situation, and try to focus more on the consciousness part of it, on Krishna, and maybe engage more in devotional service. Things will slowly change it based on what Krishna will is. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. The more we study Shastra, the more we actually understand Krishna's will. The more we understand Krishna's will, the more we will act according to Krishna's will. And the more we will become actually detached from anything material, whether it's an activity, a result, any of that. Mm-hmm. It won't be important anymore. It's not the subject of the focus. The focus is Krishna. So, I don't know if you've ever used one of these cameras that you actually have to focus, because nowadays everyone uses these things. But the thing about focus is, if you're actually properly focused on something, the background is completely blurry. You don't even see what's in the background, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we properly focus on Krishna, all these other things fade away. They're not even things that are important, interesting, any of that. But currently we're focused on the other things, the results, the material aspect. right? Because we're self-centered. Instead of Krishna being in the center, we're in the center. So that's what we're focusing on, things and how they serve us. So that's why we see these things. That's what we notice. We notice that, oh, I want it to go this way, but it's not, right? And so now I'm frustrated. But if we take that focus from, the material external things and put it on Krishna, then all of those external things we don't even see. Just like currently now, we don't see what Krishna's desires are because we're not focused on them, right? Right. So when we study Shastra, then we actually understand, oh, okay, so this is what Krishna wants. Then when we act accordingly, then all of those other things that once seemed super important to us, like, if I don't do this, it's going to be the end of the world. All of those things are just fade back into the background because they're not actually important in the long run. And so it's just a matter of where our focus is. If that analogy helps any, hopefully.
Yeah, it does. And I think so this also nicely tie up into my, I think so I was having a question about not having the humility, and humility means understanding that it is my pride also, pride consciousness, which is doing this. So I will not really ask you that question because I think so it answers on the humility part. But I would like to ask you about argument. When we are involved in arguments, and since we are also using our sense instruments to do that, is it a good thing to engage into argument, or it is not good thing to engage into argument? Because there may be a disagreement when we do the arguments, and in my experience, it disturbs mind very quickly compared to not not dealing with it. And then when we deal with it, even though principally we are right in dealing with it, but I don't know how much it is worth to engage in those kind of topics or subjects to involve in argument. That is where also I see myself getting in trouble sometimes.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I also in my past have been, it was a big issue for me. So it depends. Some discussions need to happen. Others absolutely do not. One thing I learned while taking Bhakti Shastri, because we also took a class called Straight Speaking, Strong Thinking. I think it was called. Jayadvaita Swami put a course together and we were studying it. And so we talked about how logic works and how to engage it in Krishna service, how to identify when someone's using a fallacious argument. There are different ones that they all have like Latin names, like argumentum ad baculum, argumentum ad hominem, slippery slope, straw man, etc. There are these different logical fallacies that people use in order to prove their points, and so to identify those, etc. And so basically we learn how to argue. It's really debate, but it ends up becoming an argument in the material world. So the first thing we learned, though, in that is that you only go into a debate or argument if you actually own the problem. So in other words, there's a problem to be solved, right? You see that there's a problem. Anybody can recognize that there's a problem anywhere. It's something that everyone in the material world is good at. We're very good fault finders, expert. Mm-hmm. There's a problem, we can find it, right? So then the question is it our problem to solve, right? So if we see someone walking by and they're doing something wrong, well, do we have the authority to correct them? Are they under us, or did they ask us for our opinion, for our advice, for our guidance, etc.? So usually the answer is no, right? And so we just don't do anything. We use it as a learning experience that, okay, I see that that's wrong, so I'm going to make sure I'm not going to do it. Not that I'm going to make sure that person knows that he's doing something wrong, and therefore, I got to make it all. No, I just see that that's the behavior, and I want to make sure that I don't fall into that same mistake. So that's the first thing. If someone actually considers us an authority and they ask us for advice, then we can give the advice in a palatable way, of course, right? So, and then it's not really an argument. It's, like I said, it's a debate or a discussion, right? So someone asks us, then actually the problem is ours. We own it, and then we can do something about it. Or if we're in a position of management, there are people working under us, and whether they've asked us or not, we're their manager. So sometimes we have to give them some correction, right? Or, you know, if you're a father, if you're a parent, and your child is doing something, then so sometimes you have to intercede. So if you own the problem, then go ahead. If you don't, it's better to stay away from it, right? If there's nothing, if you see that it's not going to benefit anyone anyway, no one's asking you, no, you know, it's then just let it go and use it as a learning experience or use it as an example. That's the best policy, and that's how we learned it there. If that helps.
You made it so simple, and it is very right.
Oh, good.
Because that control has to come, you know, in our mind, that is it worth, you know, and you kind of said very simply, you know. I think so I had to meditate on that too.
Yeah, it takes a while to actually apply that. To know it's one thing, but then to apply it's another thing, because we're attached to the, you know, to basically being right. And so we have to get rid of that. And what you were talking about, or you were going to ask about earlier with the humility, the whole thing comes down to, I think I'm the center, I think I'm right, I think everything that I know has more value than everything anybody else knows. That consciousness will never be satisfied, will never be fulfilled, right? In that. But if we change that consciousness from, you know, to Krishna, okay, everything's centered around Krishna, because then we see, because even when people are acting against what Krishna would want, we see that actually Krishna also gave them the free will to do that, like he gave us the free will to do that. And we were wasting so much time before, right? And when we were ready, as soon as we were ready, Krishna sent us the right people to lift us out of the gutter we were in, right? Way more than we deserve, right? We've committed so much nonsense trying to forget Krishna. And as soon as we had a little tiny bit of sincerity, we were given the best fortune of a devotee to come down and say, hey, this is what you can do to get yourself out of this mess. And it's such a little effort compared to the terrible things that we've done. You know, it's so we're so fortunate, right? And so we see that that's what Krishna does. So we can also let these things go. But as soon as someone is actually sincere and they ask, then of course we give them. You know, that doesn't mean that we don't, you know, we chant and we distribute prasad. We do that, of course. But as far as getting into these conversations and trying to correct behaviors and this and that, and the other thing, that only comes when you actually own the problem, right? Then you can help provide the solution, right?
Yes.
So it's all tied together. But like I said, in theory, we can understand it, but it takes a bit to apply. But the more we understand Shastra and the more we act according to the Shastra, the easier it is to just, you know, let these things go and see why these things are actually happening. You know, because sometimes there are situations that we find ourselves in that are just so much torment involved in it. And we're thinking, why am I possibly constantly engaged, you know, in this, being, you know, confronted with this situation? And eventually we say, okay, well, you know, this was just my previous karma and I was attached, and that's why it was so annoying to me. But then when we actually engage in Krishna service, we can be in the exact same situation. It won't even bother us. It's not something we're attached to anymore. So it all works together, and it takes some time, but to whatever extent we actually surrender to Krishna being the center, then that's the extent of realization that we'll have.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you. I'm sorry we've
Without asking any questions, I got all the answers.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say.
It's very nice to hear all these things. That's why I feel like Shravanam is the best thing. And I mostly, a lot of times I think, and I never ask any questions. What is it? Quietly, I'm listening, but I'm getting all the answers from everybody. And today you gave so many answers, So that is, I think, Krishna's wish. And like Sutta Goswami and all those sages said that, he said, you may live many years and have eternal fame. So I wish like that with you. So do and give these classes. And, morning these classes, I attend to these classes. I just feel so happy. And all these years of my life, I didn't get this much chance. I used to follow what elders used to say, a lot of things, what Krishna's only they used to tell me. But I never followed like this, that systematically Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam thing. But at least I feel I'm thankful to all of you. And then thanks to Krishna giving me this opportunity to listen every day.
It's a great resource, and I'm glad that we all have this opportunity.
That's the only wish I have. And I wish you. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice and practical points you gave today in the class. And I was wondering one thing, that how merciful was Lord of Krishna to you, that the person, who paid for your ticket, he could not go, but, he arranged for you at least, so you could go, and maybe you may have more desire than him, to study Shastra. So we don't know how the Krishna plays with us, but that's a great mercy. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu.
You have lots of Krishna's blessings.
Thankfully, and they all come from the mercy of the devotees. Devotees are very kind.
And you're distributing all the knowledge to us. Thank you very much.
I'm just trying to repeat what I've heard. Yeah, it's the thing where I've had such great fortune to hear from such elevated souls. Really, all I have to do is repeat what they said. So it works out nicely. That's how I repay the debt from receiving all that knowledge. I just try to give it back without changing anything. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
All right.
Today's class just melted my heart so much, Prabhu. My heart become like soft so much. And
that's a good thing.
I don't know what to say. But listening is better than saying.
I know.
Like Vidyavali Mataji was saying, I also like to listen.
Very good, very good.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada.
Jai.
Jai.
Thank you.